My name is Nathan Hayes, and the day they fired me, nobody expected me to smile. Security will escort you out, CEO Victoria Sloan said loud enough for the entire executive floor to hear, crossing her arms with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. The office went silent as dozens of employees glanced over their computer screens. Pretending not to listen while absorbing every humiliating second, I simply closed my laptop, picked up my notebook, and thanked her for the opportunity. That confused her. She wanted an argument, a public meltdown, something she could point to as proof that firing me had been the right decision. Instead, I calmly walked toward the elevators while whispers followed behind me like a trail. "He really didn't fight it," someone muttered. "Guess he finally gave up," another voice answered. They had no idea I had spent the last 18 months preparing for this exact moment. You see, everyone at Sterling Dynamics believed I was nothing more than a quiet senior operations manager who kept projects on schedule and avoided office politics. What they didn't know was that before Sterling Dynamics ever occupied a glass skyscraper downtown, it was nothing more than 3 folding tables inside an abandoned warehouse where I wrote the original software architecture with my closest friend, Ryan Caldwell. When investors arrived years ago, Ryan believed had been destroyed years earlier during an office relocation. They hadn't. Every deleted email, every financial record, every internal chat, every board resolution still existed exactly as they had been written. I powered the servers on and watched years of hidden history come back to life across my monitors. There it was, the original founder. Agreement with both our signatures and one clause everyone else had forgotten. In the event that ownership is obtained through fraudulent misrepresentation, the original founder retains the right to request an emergency governance review before the full board. Ryan never remembered that clause because he never expected I'd keep the first signed copy. I reached into my safe, removed the original document, and placed it beside another folder labeled Project Eclipse. Inside were 18 months of evidence organized by date, transaction, witness, and legal violation. Every accusation supported by documents they themselves had created. At exactly 8:15 that evening, I made one phone call. Daniel Mercer, the oldest independent board member and the only person still alive who remembered the company's first office, answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally call," he said quietly. "It's time," I replied. "Do you have enough?" he asked. I looked at the mountain of evidence covering my desk. "More than enough." He remained silent for a moment before answering. "Then tomorrow morning the board will finally hear your side." After hanging up, I sent encrypted copies of every document to 3 attorneys, 2 auditors, and Daniel himself with instructions to release everything automatically if anything happened to me. Ryan believed firing me had ended the story. In reality, it had only triggered the first move. The next morning, while Victoria Sloan walked into the office, expecting another ordinary day of pretending to run a company she barely understood, an emergency board meeting had already been scheduled. Under a clause neither she nor Ryan remembered existed. By the time they realized why every board member had suddenly arrived in person, instead of joining virtually, it would already be too late. They thought they had removed the quiet man who never spoke. What they failed to understand was that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of someone patiently waiting for the perfect moment to bring an empire crashing down. My phone rang at exactly 7:30 the next morning, but I was already awake, sitting in my private office with a cup of black coffee and the original founder's agreement spread across my desk. Daniel Mercer didn't waste time with greetings. "The entire board is here," he said. "Ryan and Victoria have no idea why they've been called in." I smiled, locked the evidence inside my briefcase, and drove toward Sterling Dynamics for the first time since being escorted out. The security guard at the entrance hesitated when he saw me, then reached for his radio before Daniel himself walked through the lobby and said firmly, "Mr. Hayes is here under board. Authorization." The guard immediately stepped aside. I walked through the same lobby where I'd been publicly humiliated less than 24 hours earlier, but this time nobody dared whisper. Employees looked at me with confused expressions as I stepped into the executive elevator. When the doors opened, Ryan Caldwell stood outside the boardroom, laughing with Victoria Sloan until he saw me. His smile disappeared instantly. "Nathan," he asked, "how did you get up here?" Before I could answer, Daniel walked past him. "Board meeting. You should take your seat." Ryan looked from Daniel to me, sensing something was wrong for the first time. Inside the boardroom, 12 directors sat around the long oak table. I placed my briefcase in front of me without saying a word. Victoria folded her arms and scoffed. "This is ridiculous. He's not even an employee anymore." Daniel calmly replied, "Today isn't about employment. It's about ownership." Ryan's face turned pale. I opened my briefcase and removed the original founder agreement. "I'd like everyone to turn to Clause 14, I said. The company's legal counsel adjusted his glasses as he read the document. After several seconds, his expression changed completely. "This clause was never included in the revised agreements," he murmured. "That's because it couldn't be removed without both founders signing the amendment," I answered. "I never signed one." Ryan immediately interrupted. "That document is outdated." I slid another folder across the table. "Then perhaps these will refresh your memory." Inside were copies of internal emails between Ryan and Victoria discussing the dilution of my shares, instructions to alter board records, and payments made to outside consultants who helped rewrite ownership structures without notifying me. The room fell silent except for the sound of pages turning. Victoria tried to laugh. "Anyone can fake emails," I nodded. "You're absolutely right. Which is why I also brought the original server logs, digital signatures, banking records, and testimony from the IT director you forced into early retirement 6 months ago." The company's attorney looked directly at Ryan. "Were these documents disclosed to the board?" Ryan didn't answer. Sweat had begun forming on his forehead. Daniel pressed a button on the conference phone, and 2 forensic accountants entered carrying sealed evidence boxes. One of them connected a laptop to the large screen on the wall. Seconds later, financial records appeared showing millions of dollars transferred through Shell, companies connected to Victoria's brother. Every payment had been approved by Ryan. "These aren't estimates," the accountant explained. "These are certified bank records." Victoria suddenly stood up. "This meeting is over." Daniel's voice stopped her before she reached the door. "Sit down." For the first time since I'd known him, his tone carried genuine anger. She slowly returned to her chair. I reached into my briefcase one final time and placed a small flash drive on the table. "There's one more thing." Ryan stared at it nervously. "What's on that?" I looked him in the eye. "The recording you thought was erased." The screen changed again, revealing security footage from a private conference room 3 years earlier. Ryan and Victoria sat across from outside, attorneys discussing how to remove me permanently from the company while keeping my technical expertise until every major government contract had been completed. Ryan's voice echoed through the room. "Once the software is fully integrated, Nathan becomes expendable." Victoria laughed in the recording. "He'll never see it coming." The video ended. Nobody spoke. Even the air inside the boardroom felt heavier. Ryan slowly lowered his head, knowing the fight was over. But before anyone could say another word, the conference room doors burst open. The head of corporate security rushed inside, holding a folder. "Mr. Mercer," he said urgently, "we have another problem." Daniel frowned. "What happened?" The security chief looked directly at me before answering. "Someone emptied the research division overnight. Hundreds of confidential files are missing, and every backup server has been wiped clean." Ryan looked genuinely shocked. Victoria's expression, however, told a different story. She wasn't surprised. She was terrified. At that moment, I realized something neither of us had anticipated. We had uncovered the corruption inside Sterling Dynamics, but someone else had already begun destroying the company from the inside, and the person responsible hadn't yet revealed themselves. My eyes stayed locked on Victoria as the head of security finished speaking, because unlike everyone else in the room, she wasn't shocked by the news. She looked terrified, like someone whose backup plan had just gone horribly wrong. Daniel immediately ordered the boardroom sealed while the IT forensic team was called upstairs. Within minutes, the lead investigator connected his laptop to the main screen and began tracing the unauthorized access. "The deletion wasn't random," he explained. "Whoever did this knew exactly which research files to erase." Ryan tried to shift the attention away from himself. "This is probably Nathan's doing," he said, pointing at me. He had access for years. I didn't even respond. Instead, I watched the investigator continue scrolling through the activity logs until he suddenly stopped. "Interesting," he muttered. The system wasn't accessed using Nathan's credentials or Ryan's. It was done using a level 1 executive authorization that only one active employee still possesses. Everyone turned toward Victoria. She stood up so quickly her chair crashed onto the floor. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Someone stole my credentials." Before anyone could question her further, the investigator enlarged the security footage from the research floor. The timestamp showed 2:13 a.m. A woman wearing a dark coat entered the restricted area using Victoria's fingerprint, followed by 2 men carrying empty storage cases. 23 minutes later, they walked out with the cases full. Their faces remained hidden beneath baseball caps. But the woman paused, just long enough for the hallway camera to capture her reflection in the glass door. It was Victoria. The room fell silent. Daniel slowly folded his hands. "Would you like to explain?" Victoria's confidence disappeared. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I had no choice." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" She looked at him with a mixture of anger and regret. "You think I did all this for myself?" "I was cleaning up your mess," and she, reached into her handbag and threw a thick envelope onto the table. Inside were letters, contracts, and payment confirmations proving Ryan had secretly negotiated the sale of Sterling Dynamics' newest defense technology to a foreign investment group through a network of shell corporations. He had planned to strip the company of its most valuable assets before the board ever discovered the financial fraud. Ryan's face turned ghost white. "You're lying," he said weakly. Victoria laughed bitterly. "Still blaming everyone else?" "I kept quiet because you promised we'd both walk away rich. Then yesterday you told your lawyers to make me the fall girl if anything went wrong." She turned toward the board. "Check his private accounts. Every transfer is there." The forensic accountants immediately began reviewing the records, and within minutes one of them looked up. "She's telling the truth." Ryan slowly sank back into his chair as if every ounce of strength had left his body. The empire he'd stolen was collapsing around him. Corporate security entered again, this time accompanied by federal investigators carrying official warrants. One of them walked directly to Ryan. "Mr. Caldwell, you're being detained pending investigation into corporate fraud, financial crimes, and unlawful transfer of proprietary technology." Another investigator turned to Victoria. "You'll need to come with us as well." She nodded without resistance. As they were escorted out, Ryan stopped beside me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he lowered his eyes and said quietly, "I should have trusted you." Instead of my own greed, I looked at the man who had once been my closest friend and answered, "You didn't lose this company today. Ryan, you lost it the day you decided loyalty had a price." He couldn't look at me again. The elevator doors closed behind both of them, and for the first time in years, the executive floor felt strangely peaceful. Daniel stood and addressed the board. Effective immediately, I moved that Nathan Hayes be reinstated as founder and acting chief executive officer until a formal election is held. One by one, every board member raised a hand. The vote was unanimous. I should have felt victorious. But as I looked out through the glass walls overlooking the city, all I felt was responsibility. Sterling Dynamics had survived betrayal, corruption, and greed. But rebuilding trust would be harder than exposing lies. Just as the meeting ended, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, only a single sentence. "You exposed the wrong people. The real owner is still watching." I read it twice before slowly locking my screen. Whoever sent it knew everything that had happened inside that boardroom, and that meant this story wasn't over. It had only reached the end of its first battle. My phone stayed in my hand as I read the message again. "You exposed the wrong people. The real owner is still watching." I didn't tell the board. Instead, I quietly forwarded it to Daniel and asked him to trace the number. 3 hours later, he walked into my office carrying a thin folder, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen. "The message didn't come from Ryan or Victoria," he said. "It came from inside our own network." My stomach tightened. That meant someone still working at Sterling Dynamics had access to executive communications even after everything that had happened. Daniel placed the folder on my desk. There's one name that keeps appearing wherever the missing research files are. Mentioned. I opened it and froze. The name belonged to Samuel Reeves, our chief financial officer, a man so quiet and forgettable that nobody had questioned him during the investigation. While Ryan and Victoria fought for power, Samuel had quietly moved millions through consulting firms he secretly controlled, manipulating budgets, creating fake vendors, and preparing to acquire Sterling Dynamics after its value collapsed. Ryan had believed he was the mastermind, but Samuel had been pulling strings from the shadows the entire time. That evening, I called an emergency board meeting without explaining why. Every director arrived expecting another financial update, but instead I connected Samuel's company laptop to the projector. One by one, hidden spreadsheets, encrypted emails, and offshore banking records filled the screen. His face slowly lost all color. These documents are fabricated, he claimed. But before anyone could respond, federal investigators entered the room once again. Daniel had contacted them an hour earlier. The lead investigator placed a warrant on the table. Mr. Reeves, we've recovered the missing research files from a warehouse registered under one of your shell companies. You'll need to come with us. Samuel looked around the room, searching for someone to defend him. But every board member remained silent. As security escorted him toward the door, he stopped beside me and whispered, "You think you've won? Companies like this always create." Another man like me looked him straight in the eye. Not this one. The doors closed behind him, and for the first time in years, there were no more secrets left inside. Sterling Dynamics. Over the following weeks, we rebuilt everything from the ground up. Every fraudulent contract was canceled. Every stolen dollar we could legally recover was returned. Independent auditors were hired. New ethics policies were approved unanimously, and every employee was given the opportunity to anonymously report misconduct without fear of retaliation. I promoted people based on integrity instead of politics, and the culture that had once rewarded silence and deception slowly disappeared. 1 month later, I stood in the same conference room where I had been publicly fired. This time, every employee had gathered voluntarily. I looked around the room and recognized many of the same faces that had watched me walk away in silence. A few weeks ago, I began. Many of you believe this. Company belonged to executives sitting behind glass offices. It doesn't. It belongs to every honest person who walks through these doors each morning ready to do the right thing. The room remained silent until someone in the back started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire floor erupted into applause. But this time it wasn't for humiliation or fear. It was for hope. After the meeting ended, Daniel handed me a small wooden box that had been discovered during the renovation of our original warehouse. Inside was the first employee badge ever printed for the company. My name was faded but still visible, Nathan Hayes, founder. I smiled, slipped it into my pocket, and walked toward the window, overlooking the city we had spent years trying to conquer. Success, I realized, isn't proving your enemies wrong. It's proving to yourself that no amount of betrayal can steal your principles. Ryan lost his freedom. Victoria lost her ambition. Samuel lost the empire he tried to steal. As for me, I finally got back something far more valuable than a company. I got back my name, and this time no one would ever take it away again.